Hello, my name is Jennifer Zimmer. I am the daughter of Carolyn Bunning. Carolyn is my mother, who was a presenter for the community health classes at the University of Missouri Health-Related Professions. Carolyn Bunning was a adjunct professor for the University of Missouri and also spoke with the community health classes at Health-Related Professions about her life with living with polio as a survivor. Unfortunately, my mother was not able to do this presentation as she passed March 27th of this year. So I'd like to start with talking about her childhood growing up with polio. My mother was born in January of 1944 in Los Angeles County, California. When the family had traveled home to visit family members in Missouri, she remembers playing in the creek, and she was about 4.5 years old, almost 5 years old. And when they came back from visiting family members in Missouri, she and her siblings started running high fevers. And when they got to Los Angeles County, Mom was diagnosed with poliomyelitis, which is basically the degeneration of her peripheral nerves. There are two types of polio, and of the two, she had spinal polio, which mostly affected her arms and her legs and her breathing. The other type of polio is bulbar, which affects the brainstem, and so she did not have that. However, she was in an iron lung temporarily. So I'm going to read a little excerpt, and I'll share you guys the clip of what this looks like. On July 21st, 1949, Carolyn collapsed while helping her daddy mow grass at the house on Clark Avenue. Being diagnosed with paralytic polio, she was first admitted to the Los Angeles County Hospital, then transferred a week later to White Memorial Hospital and Clinic, Los Angeles, for therapy from July 1949 to June 1950. Her father, Melvin, was a milk deliverer for Golden State Dairy since May of 1949, taking home $282 a month for the family of 5. So the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis paid for almost all of Carolyn's hospitalizations and therapy services. A little ad note, in 1948, the polio epidemic had actually hit Los Angeles, lasting 2 years, with acute patients admitted to the General Hospital. Sister Kenny from Australia was invited to practice her therapy treatments of hot packs and manipulation of limbs, and by January of 1949, the epidemic had subsided, except for that's when my mother came down with polio. To this day, I remember my mom telling me that the smell of warm, hot wool reminds her of those hot packs when she was in the hospital. My mother, Carolyn Bunning, graduated from Southeast Missouri University at the age of 22 and started teaching English at the community high school, and then transferred to Jefferson City High School, where she taught for almost 30 years. After she taught for the Jefferson City High School school district, she started teaching as an adjunct professor for the University of Missouri for English literature classes. She also studied at Cambridge University for a semester in England, which was one of her favorite places to be. Ironically, because of her disabilities, they put her on the first floor, and the room that she was in was also the room that Prince Charles would stay in when he was there. So that was one of her favorite stories of being at Cambridge. So for my mother, growing up with polio was a topic she didn't talk about very much, just because it was a very difficult childhood. She did, however, journal and was able to receive the medical records from Los Angeles County, and then later on from Cardinal Glennon Hospital in St. Louis, where she was treated and had numerous surgeries for her poliomyelitis and the resulting deformations that she had to deal with. In 1949, they had just moved to Clark Avenue in El Monte, California. And in July of 21st of 1949 was when she was admitted to the Los Angeles County Hospital with paralytic poliomyelitis. July 27th through October 18th of that year, she was at White Memorial Hospital for therapy services. And then she was admitted again from January through June of 1950 for polio clinics. And she was able to attend part of the school year at First Lutheran School in El Monte for first grade. In July of 1950, against medical advice, the family decided to move back to Jackson, Missouri. Um, and so she made the trip in the back of the car all the way back to Missouri in a body cast. She attended St. Paul Lutheran in Jackson in 1950 to 1952, but was only in school for part of the second and third grade due to having to receive therapy and being in a rotokinetic bed. She remembers a lot of times she would tell me the teachers would come to school from school would come to see her once or twice a week, and that was kind of the highlight of her week is getting new books to be able to read. In August of 1952, she was admitted to Cardinal Glennon's Children's Hospital till October for spinal surgeries. She had very severe scoliosis, which of course affected the digestion and affected her respiratory status. Fortunately, she did not have to be on oxygen till later in life, but that was one of her biggest concerns is that she would lose her respiratory status again. In September of 1952, she had surgery for fusions from her thoracic 5 level all the way down to her lumbar 2nd level, and she was in a full body cast that year. In September, she had stage 2 of that spinal surgery, where they had to do fusions from her thoracic 5 all the way down to her 2nd lumbar region of her low back. In January of 1953, she was able to come out of the full body cast and put in a short body cast. And then from August to September of 1953, she returned to Cardinal Glennon for more extensive therapy. She was basically relearning how to walk at that point because her legs had atrophied so bad from being in body casts. In August 25th of 1953, she had refusion of her thoracic to her lumbar spine, and she was again in a full body cast. And every time she was in a full body cast, she was in a rotokinetic bed because she was not able to do a lot of weight bearing. And in December of 1953, she came out of the full body cast and was put in a short jacket cast. In February of 1954, the cast was finally removed. So that was several years of her being in body casts because of the polio. In February of 1956, she had another fusion from lumbar 2 all the way down to lumbar 4 at her low back area, and she was sent home with a full body cast again. And then in June of 1956, she had the removal of the body cast, and that was the last time she was in a body cast. So you can imagine from 1949 to 1956, she was essentially in a body cast for almost 7 years. The only time she was out of the body cast is when she was receiving intensive therapy at Cardinal Glennon Hospital. And she was home for part of those years in order to go to school or have teachers come to her. And then finally, her first full year of school was in 8th grade, where she was able to attend St. Paul Lutheran, and that was from September to May of 1956 to 1957. They even had newspaper articles about her where members of the Girl Scout group would come and bring her toys and presents and books to read throughout the years that she was basically homebound and was not able to attend school. So I was born in 1966, and against medical advice, mom was able to have a child. The doctors told her that she should not have children just because of the strain that it would take on her back. And so she was bedbound for the majority of her pregnancy. And she was also 21 years old. If you can imagine being 21, bedbound, and being pregnant. But I was born January of 1966. It was a very complicated delivery. As you can imagine, with her severe scoliosis. So it ended up being an emergency C-section. So fortunately, all went well. And my parents struggled for many years just because they were young adults raising a child with not a lot of resources. But mom was very determined. Even though she appeared to have a lot of physical disabilities because of her scoliosis and her limp, she really didn't let anything slow her down. So she was able to get her bachelor's degree when she was 22 and start teaching. She was later on able to go back and get her master's associate specialist degree. And she was actually pursuing her doctorate degree when I had my first child, my son. And that's when she decided to retire because she wanted to be a full-time grandmother more than she wanted to have her PhD. I want to tell you a little anecdote. So Mom missed out on a lot of childhood opportunities, development, because she was in the hospital basically from age 5 till 8th grade. And so when I was learning how to ride a bike at age 5, my mom had never learned how to ride a bike. And so we both learned to ride bikes together. And that's a pretty amazing experience. I would like to introduce you to my mother, Carolyn Bunning, who fortunately we have pre recorded presentations from the health related professions classes that she spoke. So, in her words, I would like for her to let you know about what her life was like with living with the complications and the side effects of poliomyelitis as a child.
Hello. Nice to meet you all. Now, my story is a summary of a lot of thousands of children who were affected in the summers of 1940s and early 50s. So this is my story, but it also is the same as many other children. They rushed me to the county hospital. Mom said she knew what it was.
You were helping to mow the lawn?
Yes, I was helping. Yeah, I was helping him push lawnmower.
Mm-hmm.
I was diagnosed with acute paralytic poliomyelitis, which transmits through the mouth due to fecally contaminated water or food, which is why we couldn't use pools because babies had the diapers on when they went into the pools. Uh-huh. It replicates in the gastrointestinal tract, and then it's carried by blood throughout the body. The interesting fact here is that poliovirus continues to be transmitted for several weeks while the virus remains in the throat or feces, which explains why they put children and adults who were affected by the poliovirus into quarantine immediately. Notice the black cat.
Yeah, Carolyn, that's you, isn't it?
Yes, that's me.
And your path was crossed by the black cat.
Yes, and of course that was the whole reason for my getting polio. The polio epidemic hit Los Angeles County in 1948. There were, in the first 6 months, there were 31 deaths. I was caught July 1949. So I'm questioning whether it was a Los Angeles epidemic or the Cape Girardeau epidemic, which I'm going to show in the next slide.
Were you living in Los Angeles?
Yes, we were living in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh. But
I was born there.
Uh-huh. You were visiting Missouri?
Yes. 5 to 10% of individuals who contract the virus exhibit minor symptoms. They might have a sore throat, fever, headache, a cold. Or the virus could have been the result of July 1949 trip to Missouri. We were swimming in the creeks. Babies without diapers, no indoor plumbing. Mom said we all had colds and fevers on the drive back to LA in July of 1949. And I was saying, I think I found the cause.
Yeah, as you remember.
It wasn't the black cat.
You all up there?
Yes, that's my cousins, and I'm the second to the right. And I'm drinking a bottle of water.
Wow.
I guess it's water. It may have been punch or Kool-Aid.
Uh-huh.
Kool-Aid.
Wow, it's a prophetic picture.
Yes, it is. What are the treatments for polio victims for children? I mainly concentrate on children in the LA area and stories that have been written by these survivors. Paralysis of the legs, compromised breathing, which includes the later use of the iron lung, intense leg and back pain, difficulty urinating, extreme fatigue. And of course, we were all isolated from our family for several weeks. Sister Penny is someone that you may come across if you continue your study of the polio virus and the vaccine. Her method of hot packs and exercise to loosen and re-educate the alienated muscles were her methods that were completely negated by other physicians. they actually kicked her out of the country at one point because they did not believe that she was doing anything positive for polio. Mr. Kenny's boiling hot wool packs under plastic to keep in the heat. This comment about the photograph is that must have been cool when they were taking that photograph, because he's not screaming, he's not crying. It was horribly hot. Mr. Kenny fought against immobilizing the damaged limbs with splints and body casts. Methods followed even into the late 1950s.
So you smell boiling wool now. How does that make you feel?
It really, for a long time, not so much now, it brought back that very feeling. And I don't know, it's just a very uncomfortable feeling. Other treatments involved hot therapy pools like FDR's hot springs. This warmth probably did more for paralyzed limbs than anything else. Ireland. I was in a room in St. Louis Hospital with, it was actually at LA. I was in a room with 2 patients that I can remember that were in Ireland. And I remember hearing the machine keep up the breathing all night. And I was always concerned that one of them would stop breathing.
Yeah.
And one did actually die, but I don't remember hearing the machine. I just remember the next morning when I woke up, the machine was not there.
Wow. Must have been very traumatic for a young child.
I really don't remember it at this point.
Yeah.
It's been so many years ago.
Yeah. That might be a blessing.
Yes, it is. Oh, this is the rocking bed. The rocking bed, and I understand from my medical records, which I have received, I wrote for and received from LA Hospital, that I was on the rocking bed for a period of time to provide for the breathing, but it also provides exercise. Do they still use rocking beds, Jennifer Zimmer?
No, I've never seen one of those. Okay, I remember the there's you go to your bed and you can do your arms and your legs at the same time for exercise.
Oh, really? Like a lying down.
Yeah, like
Cross country, lifts or something.
Yeah, picture of very people using
That's good.
We've come a long way in the world of physical therapy.
Braces are rated the iron lung patient with more time each day out of the lung. Little girl and little boy there. Another therapy was learning how to walk again with braces and bars. And I do remember that period of time.
So, Carolyn, how are you feeling now?
How am I feeling now? I have post-polio. For the last, I'd say 10 years. It's been increasing a little bit each year. I have occasional pain in the legs, difficulty in walking. But when I compare myself to other post-polio individuals, and I've met several over the last 10 years, I'm really blessed.
Fortunately, polio is almost eradicated, which is amazing because the vaccine only came out 70 years ago, not even 70 years ago. And because of that, polio is only present in third world countries. Unfortunately, it is very difficult for healthcare providers to get to those countries and get to those potential patients due to their governments not allowing them in. So therefore, it's very important to me as a healthcare provider when I'm talking with my clients and also friends and family members to ensure that immunizations are up to date, just because of the high risk of living a life with disability and struggles. I think my mom has so much potential, And there's so many more things she could have accomplished had she not had polio. Thank you for taking your time to listen to our family story. I'm Jennifer Zimmer, and take care.
My name is Tom Choinski, and I moved to St. Louis 4 years ago when my husband's job transferred from Boston. I have an unusually large cluster of Facebook friends living in Italy. In February 2020, they began posting about a frightening new, highly contagious disease. The death rate was alarming, and the country began to shut down. 3 weeks later, my Boston friends began posting about new cases, shutdowns, and runs on the supermarket. I guess my Facebook feed was telling me COVID would arrive in St. Louis in a matter of weeks. Having seen my share of zombie apocalypse movies, I sometimes mused about what it would like to hunker down with enough supplies. To me, the pandemic would always be about math. Instead of shopping once a week, I would shop once a month. The grocery rush hadn't happened here, so I stock up on dried canned goods and plenty of those root vegetables nobody buys anyway. My husband works at the Federal Reserve Bank, where their working philosophy is since 9/11 was always about disaster preparedness. I work at Centene, which specializes in medical intelligence. When our employers sent us home to work, we both knew it was going to be for a very long time. At least when it comes to living spaces, I have a talent for designing pretty comfortable prisons. It was an emotionally difficult next few months. My day job was intellectually stimulating enough that working at all hours became the quarantine equivalent of jigsaw puzzles or taking up knitting. I maintained my friendships through social media and even cultivated some new friends. For a year, I wrote a series of posts called Socially Distant, chronicling each day's observations from the banal to the outrageous over the course of a year. I also wrote about the discomfort of living in a condo where some neighbors prioritize deck parties and a reopened pool over protecting each other. And of course, not only was there a pandemic, but the presidential primary season was in full swing. Between the two, it became obvious that 2020 was going to be the year where nobody would get what they wanted, from wearing a mask and maintaining distance to being asked wholeheartedly to support a candidate at the bottom of your preferences list. There was no sitting things out. By not contributing to the solution, one was directly contributing to the problem. The notion of personal sacrifice for a national cause was dead. It was heartbreaking to find out how many people I respected would make their choices knowing this fully well. The arrival of better fitting, more comfortable masks gave my husband and me the courage to go out to restaurants at least once a week, attending off hours, sitting outside, or preferably both. We also moved to a new 36-story apartment tower on Kings Highway. It was a mixed blessing, a brand new building no one had ever moved into yet, and we had an entire floor to ourselves. Yet in its status of being under construction meant dozens of workers and residents and movers all were funneled through only 3 elevators. On October 1st, my husband first started complaining about his sense of taste. Neither one of us had a fever, but we decided that if we were merely suspicious, we were all in. We quarantined and made an appointment for testing, and by October 8th, we were both diagnosed with COVID-19. During my illness, my temperature was elevated, but only crossed into official fever territory for less than a day. However, my breathing became labored and I slept with my lungs elevated. My oxygen level was in the low to mid 80s. In contrast, my identical twin brother in Maryland spent nearly 10 days hospitalized and on oxygen. He is currently not reporting long-haul issues. For nearly 6 weeks after being cleared from quarantine, my lungs felt like they were being squeezed by an invisible fist. I suspect I had pneumonia. Seeking medical advice about what to do next proved unexpectedly frustrating. The system seemed designed to detect and track active cases, but once you were deemed to be no longer a danger to others, you were in a state of limbo. I have yet to fully recover. Energy management is my largest challenge. Daily crashes, brain fog, deep tissue muscle pain. Climbing stairs, getting dressed, and tying my shoes leave me winded. My health resembles the stock market. Some days are up, some days are down. The best I could hope for is a trend line that goes up over time. If it does, it's so imperceptibly that progress is measured in monthly increments. Mornings are the worst as my body transitions from lying flat to standing up. By dinner time, I experience energy crashes. I jokingly compare my circumstances to that Disney movie Freaky Friday, but instead of a 13-year-old Jodie Foster switching bodies with her middle-aged mother, I switched with a 95-year-old woman. I wonder if Queen Elizabeth has been feeling extra perky today. The clinic at my office is not taking COVID patients. I'm still looking. The recommended ones aren't taking new patients, and I would prefer to find one that specializes in COVID, but I don't think they even exist yet. I decided to take control of my own therapy. Daily walks in the park a little farther each day. I purchased a volumetric exerciser, which I refer to as chin-ups for the lungs. And I've been leaving the house more often and on more physically challenging trips. Now society is returning to a quote unquote normal and as awkwardly as it entered the pandemic. If there is any message you can take from my story to pass on to people who might be hesitant about getting vaccinated, it's that COVID is something to always take seriously, even when you take precautions. It can still sometimes find its way through to you. If you have an opportunity to get vaccinated, just do it. I hope no one else has to go through what I just went through and what I'm going through now. And although I'm theoretically cleared for most public spaces, I suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic social distancing, and my mask is always within reach.
My name's Charlie Hinderliter. Back in January of 2018, I started the month as a healthy 38-year-old, and by the end of that month, I was in a medically induced coma on the verge of death. So today, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my experience with the flu and why I've now become a vocal advocate for people to get their flu shots. Back in January of 2018, I came down with the flu. I was at a conference, talking to a lot of folks, interacting with people in Jefferson City, and came back from a conference on a Friday night and started feeling bad. I went to the doctor the next Tuesday. My wife had gotten the flu as well. She got Tamiflu. I'd been past the 48-hour mark, so I didn't. Went back to the doc on Thursday. They sent me to the ER. ER sent me home. And that Friday night / Saturday morning of that next week, I could tell something was seriously wrong. So we went to the ER, and at that point, I don't have much memory. I'm told that within about 15 minutes, I was put into a medically induced coma, and I was in that coma for about a week and a half. It wasn't until not the following Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that, that I woke up, and I still have no memory from that Tuesday or Wednesday, and only a little bit from that Thursday. So I'm here to tell you that the flu shot is a good idea. Influenza A just wrecked me. What started out as the flu turned into pneumonia, it turned into sepsis, septic shock, and multi-organ failure. My lungs failed. I was put on a ventilator. My kidneys failed. My liver failed. My heart failed. I was close to being put on ECMO, but thankfully turned a corner. And I'm thrilled for the work that you all do, because the work that you do literally saved my life. But it is not a pleasure to be here today, because this is the most traumatic thing I've been through, both physically and emotionally. And it's not something I like to talk about, but we know that the data is out there that should be compelling, but we humans are more motivated by stories than data. And while what I went through was unbelievably boring to live through, it turns out that some people have found this to be a compelling story. And now every fall, I get a lot of texts and emails and people telling me that they got their flu shot because of my story. And if I can be a cautionary tale that can help protect other people, that's something that I think is worth doing, to try to turn a very negative experience for me into a positive experience for somebody else. So hopefully this is a story that maybe you can use as well. I ended up spending 58 days in the hospital, and I was counting because by the end I was incredibly bored and wanted out. There's nothing like wearing nothing but a hospital gown for 58 days. Let me tell you how much fun that is. Way too many people saw my butt. I then spent 21 days in a nursing home, and it was the same nursing home my grandmother lived in. Let me tell you, that was not an experience that I anticipated in my lifetime. Thanks to the flu and the complications from that, I came out of that coma with very little strength. And the amount of rebuilding that took was just a months and months long process. And here we are 3 years later, and honestly, I still have strength. I still need to rebuild them, although at this point, that's on me. And I want to take and just share a moment from that experience in the hospital. That's one that's kind of stuck with me, because for me, it was a little bit of a low point. And it's one that I think encapsulates a little bit of how this had just really wrecked my body. I was unable to stand because I was too weak coming out of the coma. My esophagus had atrophied. I didn't know that was a thing that could happen. So I had an esophageal ulcer because I had a pill lodged in my throat for a couple of days. Again, I'm learning all sorts of new terms thanks to this experience. So I was sent down for a routine test to check out how I was able to swallow. So I'm trying to stay on this table. It's at a high angle because I can't actually just stand on my own. So I was struggling just to be able to stay upright, to test my throat because I was unable to swallow. After that test, I was put into a wheelchair to take me back to my room, and I started a coughing fit. And these coughing fits had become pretty common by this point, and as it turns out, it triggered a panic attack, which had started a little while before, because as it turns out, not being able to breathe is a cause of anxiety. So there I was in a wheelchair, unable to stand, unable to swallow, having a panic attack. And it was amazing how kind the medical staff was, but it was one where it was just a humiliating experience. And it's one where, I felt I had so little dignity. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that a flu shot, maybe we should call it the influenza vaccine. Maybe that sounds better. I don't know. If I'd gotten that, maybe it would have prevented this whole experience. Maybe it would have just lessened my symptoms. But I got to tell you, I could have used some lessened symptoms through that experience. People complain about the shot in the arm. I got a shot in the stomach every 8 hours to prevent blood clots for weeks on end. I will take a shot in the arm any day of the week compared to that. Thanks to the fact that I couldn't swallow because of my esophagus is atrophied, I had to have a feeding tube put in. So that was interesting, having that put in directly through my stomach. I had multiple surgeries to put in a trio of drainage tubes to deal with an empyema. Also, every time I heard empyema, I just really wanted an empanada. And to this day, anytime I see an empanada on a menu, I order it. But if you don't know what an empyema is, don't look it up, because it's not going to actually be appetizing at all. So it's good that I didn't really connect the two. So multiple surgeries. It was just an unbelievable experience, and one that I don't wish on anybody. So I've really become a proponent to tell people to get the flu shot. Anything you can do to prevent an experience like this, I think is important. And for me, it's kind of threefold in who it protects. One is it protects you. But two, I think this was a much harder experience for the people around me than it was for me. As much as my experience sucked, I think it was harder for my family and loved ones. My mom had to call my brother and my dad, who both live out of town, and say, "You may need to come home. You may need to say goodbye." My wife was told that she may need to consider starting to plan a funeral. That was a horrific experience for them that I know they're still dealing with. And as it turns out, having a global pandemic of a respiratory illness makes people a little twitchy in my household. So I've not gone many places since March of 2020, and was very excited to get my COVID vaccine as soon as I could. So I'm thrilled to say I'm fully vaccinated for the COVID-19 now. So I recommend getting the flu shot for yourself. I recommend getting the flu shot for your loved ones so they don't have to sit by a hospital bed watching someone they love in peril for their life. And also, I recommend it for those that are immunocompromised, those that can't get a shot themselves. We want to make sure that we're protecting everyone around us, including those that can't get that. So I think that's a key point of whether it's the flu shot or any other vaccines. That herd immunity is so important. And I'm glad that at least we have a greater understanding throughout American society now of the importance of herd immunity, even if we still have a ways to go to get to people reaching that state. I got to say, I was excited to get out of the hospital when I was discharged and headed to the nursing home. And the nursing home was not a great experience for me, but at the same time, I was really hesitant to leave it. I was worried about going home because at that point, for almost 3 months, I'd been under close observation by medical professionals and was very worried about being on my own. That was a lot of anxiety. As it turns out, going home was amazing. It was fantastic. I felt so much more like me. My appetite, which had been an issue for a while at that point, really returned. I'd lost more than 40 pounds during my time in the hospital, which I've more than made up for by this point, unfortunately. And so there was a lot of anxiety about the return from home, but then the return from home really felt good. Um, at that point, I was still walking with a walker. I was able to rebuild that. The physical therapy kind of got weird in that, a part of what we did is we went for walks, but I had to have a band around me. So it really felt like the physical therapist was just like taking me for a walk like I was a dog up and down the street. So some of it was just weird, just odd experiences. Um, but I mean, there's still an emotional toll that I mean still reverberates to today. COVID certainly caused a lot of anxiety in my household. Honestly, more for my wife than myself, but for me too. Um, and there was definitely some rebuilding in terms of what life is like. My wife really likes one photograph. It was probably May of 2018 because she said it was really the first time she'd seen me smile um, since I went into the hospital. So I mean, that's one where I don't even know that I was fully aware of it, but those around me really could see kind of that emotional progression and that change that took place. I was so fortunate that I had such support from family and friends. Um, when I woke up, apparently they told me repeatedly what happened, but I guess they got a lot of practice because I kept not remembering it. But I remember that Friday after I woke up being very overwhelmed. In one hand, because holy crap, what just happened? Um, but on the other hand, just the outpouring of love and support. Um, some friends had started a GoFundMe page to help cover my medical expenses, and that was just incredible. My brother flew in from out of town, although he had to leave before I woke up. My dad came in town, and my dad, my mom, and my wife took 8-hour shifts for at least a few weeks, where literally one of them was by my side the whole time. And at some point, they stepped it down where it was just, during the day. But my wife was there in the hospital with me virtually every day I was there, with the exception that she was actually at home with pneumonia while I was in a coma. And it's odd to say there's a silver lining there, but that meant that she didn't see me as much when I was at my worst. And I think that, frankly, we're both a little bit grateful for that, although she probably should have seen more medical care to address her pneumonia as well. Um, I had friends and former colleagues that sent care packages. The outpouring of support was just so amazing um, and uplifting, but at the same time, it was so tough, especially for my mom, my dad, and my wife that were doing those rotations and with me every day. I could see the toll that it was taking on them too. I have permanent effects from this. I've got scarring in my lungs. I've got reduced hearing in my right ear. Ototoxic drugs is another fun word I learned. Um, and there's definitely some emotional baggage that I get to carry with me too. Um, but the good news for me is that I made a pretty much full recovery. My life is back to normal. But there are others out there where that's not the case. I've got a friend that I met through this process, through a mutual friend who went through something similar to I did. But she lost a leg because she did go on ECMO. So I feel very fortunate that I came out of this whole experience pretty similar on the back end to where I started on the front end. But there are others where that's not the case. Um, to me, in retrospect, it's kind of mind-boggling how many people die from the flu every year, which, man, influenza is a nasty bug. Um, and it's a disease we have a vaccine for. And I was just one of those people that, as a healthy 38-year-old, thought, I thought the vaccine's mostly for the young and the old, and I don't need that. And as it turns out, I was very wrong. And the more people we can get vaccinated, I think the better off we all are. And I think that's a message that I'm happy to carry forward. So, a thought to leave you with: I had an amazing team that helped me through this process. The doctors, and I got to learn a whole new group of specialties that I did not know existed before that. But the doctors, the nurses, the janitors, the techs, the transport people. So many different healthcare professionals went into my recovery. It's just tremendous, the team that it took, and I'm so grateful for that. And I think that's another key reason why we want to make sure people get these vaccines, is to reduce the strain on you, on the healthcare professionals. We want to make sure that we're not inundating the hospitals during flu season. We want to make sure that your lives are easier. And I think that's something we want to make sure that we spread that message too. Get a flu shot, get that influenza vaccine, not only for yourself, for your loved ones, for your community, but do it for the healthcare professionals. Why fix a problem when you can prevent that problem? Make their lives easier.